Muscular man mocks an elderly stranger on a train, until he sees his necklace. The train rattled along the tracks, its dim fluorescent lights flickering above passengers who sat scattered in the worn-out seats. It was late in the evening, that quiet stretch of time between rush hour and the empty stillness of the night. A few people sat with their heads bowed, scrolling through their phones, while others stared absent-mindedly out the window, their minds lost in thought. Among them sat an old black man. His posture slightly hunched but his presence steady. His clothing spoke of years gone by. A brown trench coat, its edges frayed, and a pair of boots that had traveled countless miles, each crease and scuff telling a silent story. A wool cap covered his head, leaving only his dark, wrinkled face exposed to the dim light. He clutched a simple leather bag close to his chest, as though it held something precious. Around his neck, resting against the worn fabric of his coat, was a silver Marine Corps pendant, the one thing about him that seemed untouched by time. A few seats away, Jason sprawled in his spot, legs stretched out, arms crossed over his broad chest. At 30 years old, he was in his prime, bald, powerfully built, and brimming with confidence. His tight white shirt hugged his muscular frame, making sure that anyone who glanced his way would take notice. A thick gold chain gleamed under the flickering lights, a symbol of the success he believed he had earned. But beneath the surface, Jason was in a foul mood. The day had drained him. Work had been exhausting, traffic had been unbearable, and now, he found himself stuck on this train, surrounded by strangers he had no interest in. His eyes roamed the carriage, searching for anything that might break the monotony. That's when he spotted the old man. Jason's smirk curled at the edges as he took in the man's appearance. His tattered clothes, his slouched frame, the quiet way he held himself. The younger man leaned forward slightly, just enough to make sure he'd be heard. "Hey, old man," Jason called out, his voice loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "You lose your way to the retirement home?" A few people glanced up, but as expected, no one intervened. That's how things usually went. People kept to themselves. The old man, however, didn't react. He kept his gaze forward, as if Jason wasn't even there. Jason's smirk deepened. He leaned in further, amused by the lack of response. "Come on, man. Look at you, walking around in those raggedy clothes like you got nowhere to be. What you out here begging for change?" Silence. A beat passed before the old man finally turned his head slightly. His eyes, calm but tired, settled on Jason. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "Respect is free, young man." Jason let out a short chuckle, shaking his head. "Yeah. Well, so is a trip to the thrift store. Maybe you should try it sometime." He was just about to add another snide remark when something caught his eye. The pendant hanging around the old man's neck. The cocky smirk on Jason's face faded. His breath hitched. The emblem was unmistakable. A Marine Corps insignia, silver, well kept despite its age. Jason's stomach twisted. He'd seen that exact pendant before. His father had one just like it. The memory hit him like a punch to the gut. 5 years. That's how long it had been since the funeral. 5 years since he had last held that pendant in his hands before gently placing it in his father's casket. His dad, a Marine. Proud. Disciplined. A man of unshakable honor. Jason could still hear his father's voice, telling stories about the men he had served with. The battles fought, the friendships forged in fire, the bonds that lasted a lifetime. One name, in particular, had come up time and time again. His dad's best friend. The man who had saved his life more times than he could count. Jason's gaze snapped back to the old man sitting before him. No way. It couldn't be. His mouth was suddenly dry. "That pendant," he said, his voice quieter now. "Where did you get it?" The old man looked down at it, his fingers brushing over the smooth metal. His voice was softer this time, almost reverent. It was a gift from my best friend. Man I served with. A brother to me." Jason's heart pounded in his chest. The train was still moving, but to him, the world felt frozen in place. What was his name? Jason asked, barely able to form the words. The old man finally turned to face him fully. His tired eyes studied Jason's features as if searching for something he already seemed to recognize. And then he spoke the name. James Carter. Jason's breath caught. His heart stopped. James Carter. His father's name. The old man must have seen the recognition in Jason's eyes because he nodded slowly. I knew the moment I saw you, he said. Jason's stomach churned. A deep, suffocating weight settled in his chest. He had mocked this man, judged him, treated him like he was nothing more than some frail, worn-out stranger. But in reality he was anything but. This man had fought alongside his father. He had bled beside him. He had likely saved his father's life. Jason clenched his jaw, his grip tightening on the seat beneath him. The train rumbled on, but all he could hear was the pounding of his own heartbeat. You knew my dad. Jason's voice was no longer laced with arrogance. The old man gave a slow nod. James Carter was my brother in arms. We went through hell together. Your father. He let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. He was the bravest man I ever met. And stubborn too. A shaky laugh escaped Jason's lips. Yeah, that sounds like him. The old man leaned back, exhaling deeply. You remind me of him, you know. The way you carry yourself, strong, confident. Got that fire in you just like he did when we were young. Thought we were invincible. He paused, his expression turning serious. But strength without respect. That's just empty power, son. Jason winced. He didn't need to be told. He already felt it deep in his gut. The old man glanced down at the pendant again. His voice quieter now. Your father and I made a promise, to always have each other's backs. In battle, in life, even after death. He swallowed thickly before looking back at Jason. When he passed, it felt like losing a part of myself. Jason looked down at his hands, his throat tight. I was a jerk, he admitted. I shouldn't have treated you like that. The old man chuckled. Boy, you think that's the worst thing I've been called? I've been through wars. A little attitude from a young man ain't gonna break me. Jason shook his head. Still, it was wrong. And, I'm sorry. The sincerity in his voice must have been enough because the old man gave him a small nod. Apology accepted. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the train clattering along the tracks. Jason stared at the pendant again. Finally he spoke. You got anywhere to be? The old man raised an eyebrow. Why do you ask? Jason hesitated, then said, I was thinking, maybe we could grab some coffee. You could tell me more about my dad. The old man's unreadable expression slowly softened into a smile. I'd like that. As the train screeched to a stop, Jason stood and waited for the old man to rise. Together they stepped off the train, walking side by side into the city lights.